because now they're surviving, to have to do that. But nobody talks about how 4 years after Roe v. Wade was passed, Georgia v. Coker was passed, where they overturned the death penalty for rape because they said it's cruel and unusual punishment because the rapist doesn't take a life. So if we cared as a culture, and if we really cared about women not getting raped, we would be up in arms about Georgia v. Coker being overturned than we would about, way more than we would be about preserving Roe v. Wade.
We would be up in arms, period.
I didn't even intend to do that.
I know, all depends on how much it's really easy. But yeah, I mean, and that's what, you know, I said about the feminist movement, like that's what led me to fighting for campus carry in Texas, because like, well, if I really want to give my female peers a fighting chance, because I know what it means to be completely vulnerable and completely defenseless, and I don't want another woman to ever have to even get to that point where she's 20 years down the line, still trying to get healed, still trying to, you know, go through counseling, because yes, your soul dies at that point, right? Then what things can I actually do to be proactive and to help other women? And that's what I was like, well, concealed carry, if I'm able to have that right off campus, then why isn't this, you know, obviously they're not protecting women like they say they should. In 2011, actually, at that time when I was in college, Obama actually put out a whole survey about, you know, sexual assaults across universities, and one of the highest university for sexual assaults was in Dallas, in that area. And I just remember thinking, okay, we're talking about feminism, we're talking about how we empower other women, and we're talking about empowering my peers, but why is the conversation about actually letting those peers protect their own selves on campus? Why are we, you know, stopping that conversation? So I became the Southwest Director for Student for Concealed Carry, and that was my push, and my desire and fuel was always remembering the woman, the other woman that I could, maybe just one woman.
Yeah.
You know, because a lot of people, and even the conservative movement, where, you know, they talk about the numbers, 1 in 4, 1 in 5. But for me, and I know for you, that if we can just save just one girl, I'm happy with that. I think that's all that matters, is we can just save just one.
But the flip side of that too is that people will say, oh, those numbers are skewed. You're right, they are, because the majority of sexual assaults continue to go unreported. But let's step back. If it's just one, that is one too many.
Right.
And in advocating for campus carry, my eyes were really, really open to our cultural point of view on sexual assault. And I'm convinced that campus carry has not been passed here because we just don't understand what rape does, or we just don't care that it continues to happen on our universities. And I know that that is like an extremely offensive statement to come from my mouth, and good if it offends you. But let me ask you something, or let me share something with you, really. In my advocacy efforts for campus carry, I cannot count the number of times I would sit across the office from somebody trying to, you know, get their vote for campus carry, and I would be asked, "Oh, sweetie, what were you wearing?" I mean, are you sure he didn't, like, think you were looking for that? I'm like, oh, well, I was walking to my car. Pretty sure. It's really unfortunate that you put yourself in that situation, isn't it? You know what you should have done. This is what you should have done. And then they offer up the antidote that, for some reason, they think that I haven't already thought of. And just way more offensive comments about, you know, well, it's no big deal, right? I mean, it's just a couple minutes. It's not a lifelong thing. And I realized that that's why people don't come forward. That's why victims don't come forward, because we don't need to deal with that. We already have this whole internal dialogue going on with ourselves. And then when people on the outside start speaking into that, it just reaffirms the lies that we're believing about ourselves. And so I started a nonprofit in 2015, or I started the process of starting a nonprofit after Campus Carry didn't pass again in the Nevada legislature. And it's called Tear Speak, which stands for Teaching and Empowering Assault Rape Survivors. And it's geared at educating society about the silent tears that we cry and we weep, and to give a voice and a platform to survivors to be able to say, like, this happened to me, oh, but that's not the end point in my life. Like, that's not what's gonna define my life or have the final say in my life, because the empowering part for me is equipping women. And I know that men get raped as well, but I don't speak on that because I don't have that perspective. But encouraging women to be able to reclaim the full life that they're intended to live before somebody murdered their soul. Because the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. He will come to steal your life, destroy your soul, and kill all your relationships too. And I think a lot of times our loved ones are the forgotten collateral damage, and so it's also, like, my Tear Speak is also about bringing in support for the families. I mentioned at the time that I got my concealed carry permit that my boyfriend and I have been dating for 3 years. He's now my husband. We've been married for 11. I saw that this conversation of campus carry needed to be taken way back to even why it's important to preserve our dignity and what that looks like.
Yeah, and then after the whole thing with passing and, with Texas campus carry, for me, it had always been, like I said, about the female empowerment aspect of it, and unfortunately, there wasn't representation. There weren't people like me really out there talking about campus carry as much as I would like, and finding out how hard it was for especially young women on campus to get on board, whether they're Republican or Democrat. Just because I think there are a lot of different things, but I just don't think there's been mixing the two of female empowerment and gun ownership, and why as a woman that is important for you, and getting them early in high school and in college. And so that's why I started my organization, Empower 2A, because I knew if we were really gonna stop the future Moms Demand Action, activists, we had to get them earlier. We had to get them in college, we had to get them in high school, and we had to educate, we had to train, we had to, help them advocate for this, right on campus to protect themselves and talk about the narrative, take over the narrative that college students talk about when it comes to sexual assault. Because the narrative on campus is not about, okay, then have campus carry. No, it's, let's talk about what we're gonna do to the perpetrator, right? Due process, like all of these things are always about the actual criminal aftermath of what happens, instead of talking about preventative solutions and empowering women to take safety into their own hands. Because it's not really about female empowerment, it's about a radical agenda that they have that has nothing to do with that. It's just anti-gun and pro-abortion. So, yeah. I think, unless there's anything else,
No, we can open up for Q&A.
Yeah, we're going to open up to people who have questions.
Yes, sir. Oh, yeah. Yeah. This gentleman up here asked if I had counseling after the event, and my answer is, oh yeah. I had a lot of couch time. A lot of couch time. And I think that is so important for that service to be provided to survivors, for sure. Yes.
How many states do you have
Last one, who has it? It's Georgia. I think we're at a little over 10 right now.
But you have to read the law because
Right, it depends on
sometimes
the
it'll
state.
say that it's passed, but then it allows the universities to use their discretion to allow it on their specific campus or to not.
Right. So, like, for example, in Tennessee, they have campus carry, but it's actually only staff and faculty members who are really allowed to carry. So, and for example, in Arkansas, they passed campus carry as well, but instead of just allowing people who already have their concealed carry permit, they have to go to 8 hours of additional training that's specific to the student body. So a lot of every state has almost different versions, and so I always look at Texas as a good example of what I would like other states to have, because it's every 4-year university and community college has to have campus carry. Now the private aspect of it, we understand private property rights, and unfortunately every university except for one said no to campus carry, but they have that option of not banning it, so that's what they chose. But every state is so different when it comes to it.
Yeah.
On that note, Texas law, we tried in 13 here to make it 15. We thought we had it in the assembly, we did. We were sold down the river by a senator in the Senate, and we lost. So what is the difference in Texas? In your fight to get it passed, have you had to do it multiple times? And then what do you think was the kicker that helped you get it when it did pass?
Yeah, it took 3 sessions, and we're every other year too, so it's not every year when we meet. So the last one, and it was even the time before it actually passed, and it was literally like midnight, like 11:47. I went to bed and I was like, it's over, and then waking up like, oh, it passed because they changed things last minute. But and it's always like that, and unfortunately sometimes a lot of times it is the Republicans too. Yeah, like we said, selling on the river, same thing has been happening in Florida. It's been Republicans who have said no. Unfortunately, even when they have, control. And so part of that is why you have to, I'm not saying dirt, but you have to tell people what's going on. Getting more people involved and then letting them know, like, just because you're in Texas, just because you're in Mississippi or whatever does not mean that the universities that campaign hard against campus carry, the administrators, student government leaders who will go and lobby and go to the Capitol and say, I represent the whole entire student body and we don't believe in campus carry. And you guys who are students don't even know it happens. So that's the type of stuff that people don't see, that really you have so much power in the student government, aspect of things. For example, in Baylor, the student body actually said they had to pass resolutions of whether they agreed with campus carry or not. Baylor University in Waco, Texas. And they said yes. Well, the student government president actually vetoed that resolution, and so that is why they don't have campus carry right now. So it makes a big difference on the student government aspect, but also getting that representation to the Capitol and saying, yes, we want campus carry, and this is the actual representation of that. So I would say that was the biggest difference, is getting that.
Yeah.
Going off what you just said, sorry, we're coming in.
I was talking to him.
Oh, sorry.
He'll be next.
Do we see improvement in campus carry? Do we see more of it happening recently? And do you think this present administration is helping us?
First of all, it's really a state-by-state issue. And that's probably part of when people think about campus carry, they might think it's other Second Amendment issues, and think it's something that the president would have a say in. Other than him just saying, I support it, he doesn't have a say in it. It's state by state, which I would still take President Trump saying, I support campus carry. That would be great for the movement. But again, it's this perception of people thinking that in these states that try to push it, you know, I'm sure you think New York, okay, they're not gonna push it, you don't think about that. But when you're like looking at Mississippi or Oklahoma that's tried several times and they continue not to push it or get it passed, is because they can get away with it, and they do. Florida, for example, does the same thing every year. So really it's a grassroots movement, and it has to be a student, you know, the students have to be the face of it for those representatives to really believe that that's what the students want. Otherwise, all they're looking at is the administrators who clearly do not think that we should have our Second Amendment rights, our self-defense rights. And people think it's a gun issue. In Massachusetts, for public universities, you're not allowed to even have pepper spray. It's considered a dangerous weapon. Yeah, pepper spray. So it's not a gun issue, it's a self-defense issue. And they want you though, it's a nanny state, right? They want you to depend on them. And so whatever they can do to make you depend on them and not yourself is good for them. So the movement is state by state. Georgia was the last big state to pass that. And we're waiting for the other ones, so yeah.
Yeah, so
Okay.
what can students at UNR do to promote campus carry or try to get it passed at UNR?
Yeah, so when is your next, we were trying to figure out, when is your next legislative session? Do you guys just have one?
Yeah.
2021.
21. Okay, you guys need to, first I would have like a campus carry day or something and write letters to your representatives, right? They wanna see that. Letters and phone calls, people don't understand the importance of that. That makes a huge difference, even on the national level. But then you guys on those lobby days, because student government especially is gonna go over there and they're gonna lobby. You guys need to be there and organize, be together in numbers and be there saying, we support campus carry and we're watching you, Republican, if you decide not to pass it, and you're gonna have to answer to me. So you just need to be there and be in numbers.
Yeah. I lost my train of thought, sorry. It's a lot later for me, East Coast time. But I would say too, know who you're voting into office. Yeah. Do your research. Go to, during the last presidential election, we were living in Iowa, so I took advantage of going to go see all of the candidates speak. And at the end, I would ask them, hey, what do you think the war on women is? And I'd wait for the answer, and if I didn't like their answer, I didn't vote for them. Because the war on women is that women continue to get raped. Like it's not, or like some form of that, you know, or I'd ask them too, hey, where do you stand on the Second Amendment? Oh, I'm for it. Can you define that for me? What does that look like for you? What does for the Second Amendment mean? And if they couldn't give me a clear-cut answer, then that was enough for me to know. So if you can't tell me standing face to face what you believe and what you're gonna stand for, yeah, and I think too, like taking the time to go into your representative's office if you can, to set up an appointment and give them a face of like, hey, I'm a student at UNR. This is, you know, these are my hopes and my dreams, this is my aspirations, and this is why I want to carry, this is why it's important to me. And just kind of changing the face of that, because I think sometimes the narrative gets hijacked by different political movements. And like Antonia said, just coming together. I think in the process I've seen a lot of organizations at times fight against each other for the same thing. And it just doesn't really make a lot of sense. Like we all need to be rallying together and collaboratively working together to get that goal accomplished.
What can women do on campus to protect ourselves while we still don't have campus carry?
Yeah,
I can't take a risk.
Tasers aren't allowed on campus. Someone said taser, those aren't allowed. I would say it's all about risk reduction, right? Like it's all about being aware of your surroundings. It's about looking out for each other, going in groups. Like, I mean, I don't want to say like, oh, everything I did, because obviously at the end of the day, it didn't work because, but I reduced my risk. I don't know how many times or how many other situations I prevented myself from getting into just by being aware of my surroundings. And I think just having a voice and saying, hey, I want to maintain my story of not being a survivor of rape. Can you please allow me to do that and choose how I want to protect my body? And to continue to protect yourself too, just, I mean, it makes me so mad that I see things that the universities put out about like what to do, you know, like just the most repulsive, revolting things. But then another conversation that just doesn't really happen is, if it happens, what do? Where do you go? You need to get yourself to the ER and file a report or call the police, and it's incredibly difficult. And I didn't do it initially. That's like a whole other story and backstory. But a part of that was that it just wasn't second nature to me. Like knowing what I needed to do to be able to react after the fact was I didn't know that I needed to go to the hospital. All I knew is that I didn't want my body to be a crime scene. And so I think that if more women are encouraged and empowered to be able to do that, then criminals would know that they're not going to continue to get away with it as well. And understanding that you're not alone. Like my story, I so wish it was uncommon. I really, really wish that it was an anomaly, but it's not. It's not. It's uncommon because I'm talking about it. It's uncommon because I didn't know my attacker, and it's uncommon because my attacker is never going to walk the streets again. It shouldn't be uncommon for those reasons. It should not be uncommon for the last reason in particular. So I can say in my case there was no liability on the university's standpoint. I didn't even pursue or look at potentially suing them. At the time I just really wanted to preserve my anonymity, and so I think perhaps if they were held liable while they don't allow us to protect themselves, then that would be maybe the change of a conversation. And even earlier today, Antonia and I were talking about, like, why does the university get to have their own, like, little due process, and why is it not immediately handed over to law enforcement to handle? Like, this isn't plagiarism, this isn't a collegiate academic issue, this is a humanitarian issue. And we want to preserve the dignity of our students and have it be a safe place for students to be able to come here and learn and carry on their family tradition like I wanted to. And so, I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that it would potentially, maybe, but I don't even see anything like that. I'm so jaded, I don't see anything like that passing.
Yeah, and on the second one, the second question you asked, you know, we got that question all the time, and after it passed in campus in Texas, with the private schools saying no, several students said, okay, so the liability aspect, okay. Now, what about when there's a mass shooting at this campus? What about the liability that they are going to use because they didn't allow me to defend myself? You know, we always think about the liability of, oh, because we think unfortunately, that, you know, students are gonna have firearms and of course something's gonna happen. Well, these are people who are off campus, responsible people, responsible gun owners, that take care of their firearms, that take care of themselves with stuff like that. But we don't think about the opposite of, you are now liable if something happens. You should be liable for the fact that you didn't let me to defend myself, whether it's an individual person or a mass shooting, because gun-free zones are defense-free zones, right? And so universities are the biggest defense-free zones in the country, and yet we don't put that pressure on the university when stuff like that happens, and you think of it the other way.
And again, as you said, universities somehow think they're a little cocoon where they're outside of the criminal justice system that surrounds the college campus. I don't get it. We, the taxpayers, own all these state schools, all these colleges and universities. We own them. So it boggles my mind that nobody seems to step up and say, you aren't going to tell us. We, the students paying the tuition, and we, the taxpayers and the donors, we need to be dictating to them, not the other way around. And when you have, right now we have 16 states in America who have permanent security.
Constitutional care.
Yeah, and constitutional carry, exactly. Kentucky being the last one that's, you know, just, when we have a veteran that's elected. And it seems so odd to me in those situations too, why we would automatically have campus carry. Again, these are state schools and universities.
Yeah, I think you bring up such a good point too about as students, you need to put pressure on the board too of the school and say, no more. Like, you're supposed to be representing me and you're not. So, you know, like, and just doing the same thing that you do in the state legislature for that as well.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Since majority of schools don't allow you to carry, do they have sources for you to learn self-defense?
So the question was, I think I heard it, was since the majority of schools don't allow carry, do they have sources for you to learn self-defense? They may, yes. Okay, so during freshman orientation, when I was coming here, they had this like little 2-hour like self-defense class, and they had it periodically. And being in a sorority here, it was always really frustrating to me, to be honest, because my sorority sisters would come home with this real big false sense of confidence to be able to actively defend themselves. I think they're good for teaching you how to be aware of your surroundings and maybe some like basic things, but it has to be muscle memory. It has to be instant. This is how I react because I have practiced it for years over and over again. A couple hours of maybe getting a few turns at practicing getting out of a grip or a hold, in my opinion, is not effective and is just exploitative to women. Yes, ma'am.
Of the schools now that have campus carry, is there any data out on the statistics? Is there a lower rate incidence now on these campuses than others?
There's just a lower crime rate in general.
So Kansas just a couple years ago passed campus carry, and they actually saw in the first semester saw a 19% decrease in criminal acts. All put out there by their own police. So yeah, absolutely.
So I think much of the conversation focused on the narrative of the feminist movement. And I think some of it's been misguided as like it's moved from women empowerment in regards to sexual harassment on campus to a castigation of men after it. And so it's put the main focus on the men rather than the empowerment of women, which I think it's entirely a feminist issue. So how do you shift that narrative to the empowerment of women rather than the men being the primary focus?
Or like men being villainized?
Yeah,
Is that what
well,
you're saying?
it's not, I mean, they're doing evil things, and they should, I think castigation is appropriate, but I don't think it should be the primary focus in these cases.
Correct.
Do you have it?
So how do we change that focus? Is that what you're asking? I mean, I think that there does need to be a focus on the offenders versus the victim shaming, because I've experienced a lot of victim shaming of, just in my case in general, because I didn't come forward initially. I'm responsible for Breonna Dennison's death, and I've received these messages, I'm responsible for all that, and instead of, no, I'm not responsible for that, he's responsible for that, he made that decision. And so I think it needs to be together, not so much like the castigation of men, but I'm losing all my diction, I'm sorry. I think the conversation needs to more be like brought back to, okay, yeah, that is like very important also, but then let's like get back on track to
Bring it back to what it was.
Yeah, and being able to, I think that's another thing too, is that feminism now, or modern feminism, is all about emasculating men, and that's such a disservice to this society and to our culture, and to men in general, because men are not encouraged to be strong leaders and to be strong men, and so we need to be raising our boys to be strong men and to be protectors of like, hey, no, we don't do that. Like, you just don't do that to another human being. And if you see that happening, it is your job to be a sheepdog and to go after the person that is attacking another human being. And so it's interesting, my husband and I have this conversation a lot because he's a white male, and so he's automatically, an awful human being just because he's white and he's a male. But, and he enjoys hunting and hiking, and he enjoys doing guy things. And so I think that I don't understand why we don't appreciate the diversity and how we were all made, and acknowledge that we all have important roles to fulfill in this society, and it's not that one is more important than the other, it's just different, and they're meant to complement each other.
And part of it too is that, so even the Feminine Mystique, which is like considered kind of like one of the Bibles, right, for the feminist movement, particularly the second wave, and even at the end, the author talks about how a radical faction